Exodus chapter 19. Looks like it'll be this week and next, and we'll be finished with we're going to do the first 20 chapters, so we'll finish that up, Lord willing, next week. And the following week we'll have an Awana award program. We'll bring all the children who've been in Awana up here on that Wednesday night, and we've invited their parents and their family to come and see them get their award for what they've done this year by memorizing Bible verses. And so we'll have a time of brief devotion, because we understand that maybe every person that sends their child to Awana may not know the Lord. And so we'll have a time of devotion where we'll share the gospel with them and help them to kind of understand what their children have learned, and then we'll have the kids come up and present them with their awards, and that'll be a good time. And I encourage you to come. I know you may say, well, it's just kids getting something. But what it does is it shows the young people that it's important to you that they're memorizing God's Word. And so I hope that you'll still choose to come on that Wednesday night. That's 2 weeks from tonight. And then we'll get kind of, I guess, into our summer session, if you want to call it that, and we'll just find another place to study the Word. And it's exciting, though. I love what's going on around here. It's fun. And love serving with you. Exodus chapter 19 tonight. And as you know, many of you know probably, Exodus 20 is when God gives the Ten Commandments to Moses and to the people. And so there's some preparation that has to come before he gives the law to the people. And that's what chapter 19 is all about. He's going to prepare them. He needs to, if you will, give them a syllabus. Give them that first class. You'll remember maybe when you were in school, the first class of the year, mostly the teacher just told you what was going to happen. Here's what I'm going to do this year. Here's what we're going to learn. And they had to set some ground rules and some boundaries. You know, this is what you're allowed to do in class. This is what you're not allowed to do in class. And so that's kind of what the Lord's doing with Israel. He brings them to Mount Sinai. And we're going to see tonight the special things that happened there. It's a very special place for the Hebrew people. And he brings them to Mount Sinai to prepare them for the giving of the law. And preparation is a huge thing, and God knows that. And so he brings them and says, here's the boundaries, here's the guidelines, here's what I'm about to do. Importantly, this. God says, this is what you need to know about me. And we're going to see that tonight. We're going to see how God spares no supernatural act to show those people who he is. He kind of wakes them up a little bit. Here's what it's going to be like, he says. Here's who I am. Here's what's coming. Very exciting stuff here in Exodus chapter 19. So let's dig in. Exodus 19, we'll read verses 1 through 8 to get started. Exodus 19:1 says, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim, and were come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. So, just in the first 8 verses here, we see God gives the people a message, and the people respond. But he does this all at Mount Sinai. He brings them to the foot of that mountain, and there's something about that place. A couple facts about Mount Sinai. It's in the southern central part of the Sinai Peninsula there over in the Middle East. southeast of where Israel is, directly east of Egypt, and directly west of what is now Saudi Arabia. So it's that little peninsula down there. And that's where the Mount of Sinai is, or Horeb as it's called also. So 3 things major happened at Mount Sinai. First of all, this is the place where God met Moses in the burning bush. So this is not an unfamiliar territory for Moses. It's where God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. It's going to be in the next chapter where God gives the 10 Commandments. And then in the future, it's where Elijah heard the still small voice. You'll recall what happened there when Elijah went up into the mountain, that there was a wind, but it says God was not in the wind, and there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake, and there was a fire, but God was not in the fire. It says, and then there was a still small voice. And so 3 major things happen on Mount Sinai. Interestingly enough, all 3 times something happens, there's fire present. Very common theme there at Mount Sinai. All 3 times it's mentioned in those contexts, there was fire present. And in all 3 times, God spoke to people at Mount Sinai. So you can understand why, for the Hebrews, that's a pretty important place. Next we see in verse 3, Exodus 19:3, it says, and Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him unto him out of the mountain, saying, thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. God says, I have a message for Israel. It's not for the whole world. It's for Israel. This is for my people, so gather them to me. It's for Israel. Next in verse 4, he does 3 things in the next 3 verses. Verse 4, 5, and 6. Verse 4, he tells the past. Verse 5, he tells the present. And in verse 6, he tells what his plan is for the future. So he tells them, this is what I've done, this is what I'm about to do, or this is what I'm doing, and this is what I want for you. So he gives them in 3 verses the past, the present, and the future. Verse 4, ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. That phrase, eagle's wings, I thought was interesting. Why did God use that phrase? He didn't physically put them on an eagle and take them out. Well, if you think about an eagle, and I did a little looking into it, I guess an eagle takes its babies and obviously will shelter them, but also when it wants to move them, will put them on its wings and move them. And the babies have to learn that if they struggle and fight, that they'll fall off. But if they just let the mother do all the work, everything will be fine. And so you can see where God used that illustration of eagle's wings. Because if the children of Israel will just stop fighting and let God do the work, He will bless them. And He proves that by saying, this is what I did. Remember, you were in Egypt and I got you out because I brought you out on eagle's wings. You didn't fight me. When I said go, you went. You went with my plan. I sent my man to you. He did all those I did all those wonders through him, and then I brought you out. So the pattern is, to this point, I got you out of Egypt because you came out on eagle's wings. You didn't fight me to this point. Past. Next, the present. He says, now therefore, if, conditional, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. He qualifies it by saying, listen, all this is mine. Everything and everybody in the earth belongs to me, but you're going to be something else. You're going to be special to me. I'm going to take you out from everything else and make you peculiar. You're going to be set aside just for me. That's pretty neat. And any child would want to hear their parents say, oh, I love all of you, but you're my favorite, you know. And God says, I love the world, this is all mine, but I've got something special for you. And that's what He does. So He calls out Israel and He says, if you obey, you're going to be something special. Okay, it's a conditional statement. The law is conditional. If we obey the law, there will be blessings. He's setting them up. He's getting their mindset ready. If we disobey the law, there will be consequences. Okay? He also says, we also see in this that grace is unconditional. While the law is conditional, you must do this in order to get this. Grace is unconditional. It's an unmerited favor. You can't earn grace. By faith is the only way that we can be saved. It's not by something we do, it's by faith in what he did. And so we see the stark consequence between the law and grace. So he says, the present is this. If you do this, then there will be a blessing. That's what I'm telling you now. Will you do it? So verse 6, the future. He says, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. So he tells them, if you'll do this, if you'll obey, you'll be a kingdom of priests. Now, priests were meant to represent man to God. Now, nowadays, some people in the world who call themselves a priest in certain religions feel like they represent God to man. That's backwards. There's one mediator between God and man, and that's Jesus Christ. But priests in the Bible days were supposed to represent man to God, you see. But he said, it makes us scratch our head, because we know that there's Levitical priests. By the way, something really weird happened to me last night. When we were passing out the door hangers, this is strange. Passover is this week, and I went up to a door. There was a bunch of cars in a driveway all over the street in this one house. We went up to a door, and there was a plaque, and it had a name on this plaque. And then it had the Hebrew for that name underneath it. And I happen to know that the name on the door is the Levitical. They've traced that name back to the actual Levitical priesthood. So I wondered if maybe they were, getting together for something to do with the Passover in there. Very interesting, though. And I was thinking about the priests as I studied this. And the priests, we know that Israel had priests, right? We know that, the Levites. So it made me scratch my head and say, now why did he promise them that they would be a kingdom of priests? Well, his promise was, if you obey, you'll all be priests. You'll all have a relationship with me like that. You'll all be able to come one-on-one. But we know that they didn't obey. You'll all have audience with me is what he was saying if you obey. But they didn't. And that's why they had to come up with the priesthood. He said, you'll be my people, and you'll be unlike all others, because you'll be led by me. He says, if you obey. Now, we know in verse 8 what their response is. But what I want to think about is this. The question I had today, was God setting them up for failure? When he said to them, if you obey everything I tell you to do, you'll get these blessings. Was he setting them up for failure? We know because we know that nobody can keep the commandments. See, I don't think God was setting them up to fail. The law does not make men fail. Men sin because we're sinners. God was revealing to us, to them, who they are and who we are. The law didn't make them sin. The fact that they're sinners made them sin. The law is to reveal these things to us. God wasn't setting them up to fail. God was setting them up to see who they really were for themselves. Remember what I said at the beginning? He's preparing them. He's making a difference between who he is and who they are. And he's going to go into do some great things here in this chapter to make that even more known. But at this point, he says, if you do this, you will be priests, knowing full well they won't do it. Because the law is not there to make us better. The law is there to show us that we're not like God. So the law does three things. First of all, it sets a standard for righteousness. The law sets a standard for righteousness. Keep your finger there and turn to 1 Timothy 1. 1 Timothy 1. 1 Timothy chapter 1. We're going to turn just a little bit tonight. 1 Timothy chapter 1. The law does three things. God says, if you keep my laws, I will bless you like this. Here's the three things the law does. Number one, it sets a standard for righteousness. 1 Timothy 1, beginning in verse 8. 1 Timothy 1:8. But we know that the law is good if a man use it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient. Now, if we stop there, a lot of us would say, oh, so the law is not for me because I'm a good guy. I'm a good lady, you know. So that's not for me. I'm good. I don't need the law. Let's keep reading. For the ungodly, that's not me, and for sinners, maybe not, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, that's people who stole slaves, for liars. Anybody else still going all right? Anybody else still saying, I'm good? No. All right, liars, for perjured persons, false swearers, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. All of us are guilty. So what the law does is it sets the standard for righteousness. It says, if you want to be righteous, just don't do those things. Well, none of us can not do those things. All of us are going to look at the law at some point and say, I'm in trouble. And that's what it's there for. That's what it's there for. The second thing the law does, it exposes our sin. Turn over to Romans 3. Romans 3. See, sometimes we get this idea that God gave us the Ten Commandments so we'd keep them and everything will be great. The only problem is there's never been a person that's done that except for Jesus. So he didn't do that for a measure to measure us to win or to succeed. We got the law to show us we can't. All right. Exposes our sin. Romans 3:19. It says, now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. It exposes our sin. It makes us stop our mouths because all the world becomes guilty before God when they look at the law. Not one person can say, I've not done any of those. We're all guilty. So it sets the standard for righteousness, exposes our sin, and third, it leads us to Christ. Just flip a couple pages over to Galatians 3. Galatians 3. Galatians chapter 3. This is where it all comes to a head right here. Galatians 3:19. Galatians 3:19. Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. Now a mediator is not a mediator of one, but God is one. Is the law then against the promises of God? God forbid. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, verily righteousness should have been by the law. But the Scripture hath concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Jesus Christ might be given to them that believe. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. This is the big point right here. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith has come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster, for ye are all the children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. So the law is there. We look at the law and we learn from the law, I cannot do this. I have failed. I can't possibly keep that. Now what? And then that's when God says, I commended my love toward you, and that while you were yet a sinner, Christ died for you. And if you just put your faith in Him, that law has no power over you. That's awesome. And so we see here, God wasn't setting them up to fail. The law is to reveal us that we are sinners We sin. It shows us that. We can't get away from it. It's ugly. Verse 8, Exodus 19:8. Exodus 19:8. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord hath spoken we will do. And they probably had good intentions, just like we do. But there was no possible way they could do it. C.I. Scofield said this about Israel. If you have a Bible, it's in there. If you have a Scofield Bible, you'll see it in the notes there. It says this: the history of Israel in the wilderness and in the land is one long record of the violation of the law. That's a hard way to look at it, you know. You think about that. The wilderness experience and all the time they were in the land is one just long, blown-out record that they violated the law. It's because all have sinned. And it brings us to Christ. All right, verses 9 through 15. Exodus 19:9. And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death. There shall not an hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up to the mount. And Moses went down from the mountain to the people, and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, Be ready against the third day, come not at your wives. Okay. So God says, go get them ready, go prepare them, sanctify them, set them apart. Because in 3 days I'm coming down, and I'm going to talk. So they have 3 days to get themselves ready, to be prepared, because I'm coming. They're going to hear God speak to Moses. And boundaries are set around the mountain because they're not supposed to touch the mountain, not to go up into it, and they're not even supposed to touch the base of the mountain. And here's what God is doing by doing that. He's saying, you cannot approach unto somebody like me. Because those gods that they had over in Egypt, they handled them. They set them up. They bowed to them. They worshiped them. You could carve a god. You could have one in your home. You could have one in your chariot. You could have one there in your pocket. But me, you can't handle like that. I'm not like those other gods. You can't get close to me or you will die. So God is telling them, I'm not like what you're used to. I'm a lot different. And if what I did in Egypt and bringing you out and bringing you to this point isn't enough, you're about to find out that I'm nothing like those other gods that are in the world. He's demonstrating to them His greatness. He's infinitely high and transcendent. There is nothing else ever like God. Think about the first commandment. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. He's setting them up for what's coming. And the part of setting them up for what's coming is saying, you can't get close to me because I'm not like those other gods. On the other side of that coin, when Jesus came and the veil was rent in twain, we all who believe, who are born again, have access directly to God because He invites us to come boldly to the throne of grace. Boy, aren't we blessed? Aren't we blessed to live in the time that we do? Aren't we? We have direct access to God. There's a couple things, though, that we need to learn from this. God is a holy God. There's nothing like Him. He's transcendent. He's infinitely high. And if He is all of that, then he deserves my utmost respect and reverence. And there's a lot of Christianity that's very flippant about the way they talk about God, and very flippant about the way they sing about God, and very flippant about the way they act out their Christianity. And God help us to be the kind of people who reverence God. I'm not talking about a building. I'm not talking about a history. I'm not talking about ritual. I'm talking about God. By the way, this building is just a building. You know that, right? There's nothing holy about this place. It's brick and mortar and wood. Now, it's God's, so we ought to take care of it, right? And respect it because it's God's. But it's not holy. God is holy. And if you're here tonight and you think this place is holy, you've made this a god. It's just a building. It's God's, and we ought to take care of it. But it's just a building. And he says he doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. Because the temple of God is every believer, where the Holy Spirit dwells. And we ought to take care of that. We ought to give our bodies a living sacrifice. It's easy to make something a god. But he's telling them right here at this mountain, I'm not like anyone you've ever experienced. It's awesome. All right, 16 through 20. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace. And the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake. And God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. Now here it is. Very quickly. Supernatural acts of God to get their attention. Things they heard, thunder, the trumpet, the voice. Things they saw, lightning, a cloud, smoke, and fire. Things they felt, an earthquake, and things they smelled, smoke. God was putting on an all senses display of his power. And all of us have been awakened in the middle of the night by a staggering clap of thunder, haven't we? That'll get your attention. We've all seen lightning that struck a little too close and made us jump. If you've ever felt an earthquake, you know that all you can possibly do is hide if something goes bad. We're helpless. God is putting on a display for them that says you're not dealing with just any God. And finally tonight, verses 21 through 25, it says, And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down. Charge the people lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And let the priests also, which come near to the Lord, sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. And Moses said unto the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for thou chargest us, saying, Set bounds about the mount, and sanctify it. And the Lord said unto him, Away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. So Moses went down unto the people and spake unto them. For some reason, God gives a further warning. He comes down to talk to Moses. He says, Stop, go down and tell him not to come through. And you saw Moses says, Oh, wait a minute, I already told him not to come through. It's fine. God says, No, go down and tell them not to come through. Now, these are some stubborn people. We've seen their murmuring and some of their rebellion. And he said, Remind them there's a gap. But we're reminded that Jesus bridged the gap, and he's the mediator. Mount Sinai and its commands are there to remind man that we're not like God. Mount Zion and its grace at Calvary are there to show man that we can be God's son, God's sons and daughters, and be part of his family. The difference between the law and grace. And God has prepared the people that he's a God unlike any other, and he's about to tell them something that'll change them.